Tonight, in Northampton, a commemorative service has taken place. It marked 4 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. 4 years. A passage of time measured not just in calendars, but in distance from home. The venue was the Holy Sepulchre Church. Inside that church, the Ukrainian community came together to pray. It was not a political gathering, it was not a rally, it was a moment of remembrance, a moment to reflect, a moment to stand together. The invasion began 4 years ago, and in Northampton, that anniversary was marked quietly, within the walls of a church that has stood for generations. The Holy Sepulchre Church became the setting for reflection, for prayer, for shared memory. Members of the Ukrainian community attended. They gathered in one place, they acknowledged the date, they marked the years that have passed. Among them was Solomiia Blagitko. She organized Monday's event. She arrived in the United Kingdom from Kyiv in May 2022. May 2022, a specific point in time, a departure from her home city, and now, nearly 2 years later, she remains in the UK. She described it as unbelievable that she was still here and that the conflict was ongoing. That word, unbelievable, carries weight. It suggests something hard to comprehend, something that has stretched beyond expectation. She came in May 2022. The invasion had already begun months earlier. The expectation may have been temporary displacement, but the years have extended and the conflict continues. The service in Northampton marked 4 years since that invasion. It was not a large public demonstration, it was a commemorative service. A gathering in prayer. The Ukrainian community in Northampton came together inside the Holy Sepulchre Church. They marked the anniversary. They remembered. They prayed. 4 years is a long time. And yet, for those gathered inside that church, it is also immediate. Immediate in memory, immediate in consequence. Solomiia Blagitko organized the event. She arrived from Kyiv in May 2022. She now finds herself still in the UK. She described that reality as unbelievable. Unbelievable that she was still here. Unbelievable that the conflict was ongoing. The church setting adds another layer. Holy Sepulchre Church, a place of worship, a place associated with reflection, a place where communities often gather in moments of difficulty. On Monday, it became a place for the Ukrainian community to stand together, to pray, to mark 4 years since the invasion began. There is something quiet about a commemorative service. It does not demand attention. It does not seek headlines. It gathers people who share a connection to Ukraine, a connection to loss, a connection to distance from home. Another voice at the service was Tetiana Hornik. She is a teacher. She settled in Rushden with her 2 sons in December 2022. December 2022, another date that marks relocation, another moment of arrival in the UK. She said she had hoped to go home after a few months. After a few months, that was the expectation, temporary, short term. But she added, unfortunately, I can't. That sentence is simple. It is direct. It reflects a reality that has extended beyond anticipation. She had hoped to return home after a few months, but she cannot. Now 4 years have passed since the invasion began. The commemorative service in Northampton reflects that passage of time. It reflects endurance. It reflects community. It reflects faith. The Ukrainian community gathered at the Holy Sepulchre Church. They came together to pray. They marked the anniversary. Solomiia Blagitko, who organized the event, spoke of how unbelievable it felt to still be here, with the conflict ongoing. Tetiana Hornik, who settled in Rushden in December 2022, spoke of her hope to return home after a few months and her realization that she cannot. These are individual experiences, but they sit within a shared context. 4 years since the invasion, 4 years of distance from home for many, 4 years of uncertainty. Inside that church, there were no moving images, no spectacle, just people, just prayer, just remembrance. One quiet line seems to capture the moment. 4 years and still waiting. It does not add new facts. It does not interpret. It reflects the feeling of marking time while circumstances remain unresolved. The Holy Sepulchre Church in Northampton became the venue for this moment, a place where the Ukrainian community gathered, a place where they acknowledged 4 years since the invasion. a place where personal timelines intersected with a national anniversary. Solomiia Blagitko arrived from Kyiv in May 2022. Tetiana Hornik settled in Rushden in December 2022. Both remain in the UK. Both spoke of expectations that have shifted. 4 years since the invasion. A commemorative service. A church in Northampton. A community in prayer. That is where this begins. Inside the Holy Sepulchre Church in Northampton, the commemorative service marked 4 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It was a gathering defined by prayer, defined by reflection, defined by a shared recognition of time past. Members of the Ukrainian community came together. They did not gather for debate. They did not gather for speeches filled with analysis. They gathered to pray. They gathered to mark 4 years since the invasion began. Among those present was Solomiia Blagitko. She organized Monday's event. Her journey brought her from Kyiv to the United Kingdom in May 2022, a date that sits more than 2 years after the invasion began. She arrived in the UK during an ongoing conflict, and now, as the 4th anniversary is marked, she remains here. She described it as unbelievable that she was still here and that the conflict was ongoing. That word carries a sense of suspended expectation. Unbelievable. It suggests that when she arrived, there may have been a sense that the situation would change, that the timeline would be shorter, that being here would not stretch into years. But 4 years after the invasion began, she remains in the UK, and the conflict continues. The commemorative service acknowledged that reality. It marked the anniversary. It marked the years. It acknowledged the distance from home for many who attended. The Holy Sepulchre Church provided the space. Its walls held the gathering. Its quiet interior framed the moment. This was a service, a deliberate act of remembrance, an acknowledgement of a date that changed many lives. Also present was Tetiana Hornik. She is a teacher. She settled in Rushden with her 2 sons in December 2022. Another marker in time, another relocation. She had hoped to go home after a few months. That was her expectation. But she said, "Unfortunately, I can't." That sentence stands on its own. It reflects a plan that did not unfold as hoped. It reflects a return that has not been possible. She settled in Rushden. She lives there now with her 2 sons. The months she expected have turned into years since the invasion began. The commemorative service brought these experiences together, people who arrived at different times, people who came from different places in Ukraine, but who now share a common present in the UK. 4 years since the invasion, 4 years since lives were redirected, the church setting offered space for prayer, for quiet, for shared recognition. Solomiia Blagitko organized the event. She described it as unbelievable that she was still here and that the conflict was ongoing. Tetiana Hornik said she had hoped to return home after a few months, but cannot. These statements are simple. They are direct. They do not speculate. They describe lived timelines. The Ukrainian community gathered in Northampton to pray. They marked 4 years since the invasion. They stood inside the Holy Sepulchre Church. They reflected. They remembered. The passage of time was central. 4 years. That phrase carries weight. It represents duration. It represents continuity. It represents a conflict that has not concluded. For those gathered, the anniversary was not abstract. It was personal. It intersected with arrival dates, with relocation, with hopes postponed. Solomiia Blagitko arrived from Kyiv in May 2022. Tetiana Hornik settled in Rushden in December 2022. Both remain in the UK. Both described expectations that did not match reality. One word lingers in the air from that service: unbelievable. Not dramatic, not embellished, just a reflection of how time is stretched. Another phrase echoes, "Unfortunately, I can't." A recognition of limits, of circumstances beyond immediate control. The commemorative service held these words within its walls. It provided a space to say them, a space to acknowledge 4 years since the invasion began. The Ukrainian community in Northampton came together to pray. They did so inside the Holy Sepulchre Church. They marked the anniversary. They stood together in that moment. There were no moving backdrops, no shifting images, just a community, just a church, just a shared act of remembrance. The 4th anniversary of the invasion is a national milestone, but in Northampton it was also local, personal, immediate. Voices like Solomiia Blagitko's, voices like Tetiana Hornik's, each tied to a date of arrival, each tied to a hope that circumstances might change. The service acknowledged 4 years since the invasion. It did so through prayer, through gathering, through shared presence, and through words spoken plainly. One quiet line seems to gather these elements together. Still here in the UK, still here in a church in Northampton, still marking 4 years since the invasion, still waiting for circumstances to shift. The commemorative service did not resolve anything. It did not change the course of events. It marked time, it marked endurance, it marked the reality that 4 years have passed, and for those gathered, that reality is lived daily. Solomiia Blagitko organized the event. She arrived in May 2022 from Kyiv. She described it as unbelievable that she was still here and that the conflict was ongoing. Tetiana Hornik settled in Rushden in December 2022. She hoped to go home after a few months, but said she cannot. These are the voices heard inside the Holy Sepulchre Church. These are the words spoken at a service marking 4 years since the invasion. The anniversary brought them together in prayer, in reflection, in acknowledgement of time past. 4 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that is the milestone that brought the Ukrainian community together inside the Holy Sepulchre Church in Northampton, a commemorative service, a shared act of prayer, a quiet marking of time. The church became the venue for reflection. It became the place where the anniversary was acknowledged. Members of the Ukrainian community gathered. They came together not for celebration, but for remembrance. 4 years. A number that carries duration, a number that speaks to how long the conflict has continued. For those gathered, it is not an abstract figure. It is measured in months spent away from home, in new addresses, in postponed returns. Solomiia Blagitko organized Monday's event. She arrived in the United Kingdom from Kyiv in May 2022. May 2022, more than 2 years ago now. She described it as unbelievable that she was still here and that the conflict was ongoing. That word reflects the passage of time. It reflects expectations that did not align with reality. When she arrived, the invasion had already begun. Now, 4 years since it started, she remains in the UK. The conflict continues. Inside the Holy Sepulchre Church, the community prayed. They marked the anniversary. They stood together in shared recognition. Another voice present was Tetiana Hornik. She is a teacher. She settled in Rushden with her 2 sons in December 2022. December 2022, another date marking relocation. She had hoped to return home after a few months, but she said, "Unfortunately, I can't." That sentence is plain. It does not elaborate. It states a fact about her current reality. She hoped the stay would be brief. It has not been. 4 years since the invasion, 2 years or more since arrival in the UK for some. The commemorative service brought these timelines together. The Holy Sepulchre Church provided the setting, a place for prayer, a place for gathering, a place where the Ukrainian community could mark the 4th anniversary. There were no grand statements, no sweeping declarations, just remembrance, just prayer, just acknowledgement of the years that have passed. Solomiia Blagitko's description of it being unbelievable that she was still here and that the conflict was ongoing captures a sense of suspended expectation. Tetiana Hornik's statement that she hoped to go home after a few months but cannot captures a changed plan. Both statements are simple. Both reflect lived experience. Both were part of the commemorative service marking 4 years since the invasion. The church in Northampton became a focal point for that moment. The Ukrainian community came together inside its walls. They prayed, they remembered, they marked the date. 4 years since the invasion began. That anniversary now sits within a 5th year underway, but in Northampton, the focus was on the 4-year mark, on acknowledging that span of time, on holding space for reflection. One quiet line seems to gather the meaning of the service. 4 years away, it does not add information. It does not interpret events. It reflects duration and distance. 4 years since the invasion, months and years spent in the UK for many who attended. Solomiia Blagitko arrived from Kyiv in May 2022. Tetiana Hornik settled in Rushden in December 2022. Both remain in the UK. Both spoke of expectations that have shifted. The commemorative service was an act of unity, a shared moment inside the Holy Sepulchre Church. The Ukrainian community came together to pray. They marked 4 years since the invasion. They did so quietly, without spectacle, without movement behind them, just a community gathered in one place. 4 years marked, 4 years remembered, 4 years acknowledged. And within that acknowledgement, voices that spoke plainly about being here longer than expected, about hoping to return, about not being able to. The service did not change circumstances. It marked them. It provided space to reflect on time past. Inside the Holy Sepulchre Church in Northampton, the Ukrainian community stood together. They prayed, they remembered, they marked 4 years since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And in those words, unbelievable, unfortunately I can't, the passage of time was made visible.